Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to talk about why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Carthage. But first, a word from our sponsor. Welcome to Carthage. I'm glad you could join me today. Now, most people don't realize this, but there are some places that you simply cannot visit. Oh, you can't go there. Why not? Because they aren't on any map. They never were. Most people don't realize this, but there are some places that you simply cannot visit. Oh, you can't go there. Why not? Because they aren't on any map. Now, in your time here, I'm gonna show you around a bit, but I warn you, it's not for the faint of heart. This place is full of surprises. You have to be careful where you step. There are still traps in the ground and nobody knows what's buried under the sand. Besides, this place is ancient and it's best to respect the dead. We don't want to disturb them, do we? I'm sure you've heard of Carthage before. It was quite the city, you know. Powerful, rich, home to some of the most successful merchants in the known world. Of course, it also had its rival, Rome, and you know how those two get along. It's said that Carthage was destroyed, its fields salted and its memory erased. But beneath that silence, there is still something left. Whispers in Phoenician script, walls swallowed by olive trees, graves of children and traitors. Carthage was not just a rival of Rome. It was a power in its own right, a seafaring empire built not on conquest, but on trade, on quiet negotiation, on rhythm and ritual. This was a place where the dead were honored, where the living made offerings, where men and women kept the memory of their ancestors alive. You could feel it in the bustling marketplace, hear it in the low murmur of priests, see it in the lamps that lined the harbor, taste it in the spiced wine and salted fish. In fact, if you had somehow managed to survive all these centuries, you would find yourself right at home in Carthage. All you need is an open mind and a willingness to learn. So what are you waiting for? Come with me on this journey back in time to a place that still remembers you. Just don't forget to bring your dancing shoes because in Carthage, the party never stops. Thank you for joining me on another quiet journey into the past. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an adventure. Until next time, stay curious. Carthage, the great city of the sea, surrounded by rivals, dedicated to the gods of mystery and trade. It is one of history's most mesmerizing places, at least until you try to live like it's 8th century BC. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, we will find out why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Carthage. Viewer discretion is advised for this video, as some of this video may be offensive or disturbing. We, the makers of this video, in no way support or condone the actions of the subjects featured. Daily life immersion. If you are someone who loves documentaries about daily life in the past, then you are going to love this series. Each episode focuses on a different facet of life, from daily meals to clothing styles, religious practices, and even slang words and catchphrases. You'll learn all about what people used to do for fun, how they kept their homes clean, and so much more. And if you love time travel, you're gonna love this series even more because you'll get to live vicariously through the experiences of real people in the past. Hot stone streets. Picture yourself stepping off your boat, exhausted after weeks at sea. You made it to Carthage. At least that's what you thought until you realized that the harbor was miles away from the city center, and you still had to carry your merchandise across town. Don't worry though, it's hot cockle summer, so you can cool down by walking barefoot on the hot stone streets. Just don't look down because the stones might just shift under your feet and cause you to fall flat on your face. That's right, there were no roads in ancient Carthage. Instead, there were paved walkways made from giant slabs of rock that were heated by the sun. No sandals or special footwear? Tough luck. You will burn the soles of your feet before you reach the market square. But hey, at least the streets smelled amazing. The city was filled with the scents of freshly caught fish, olive oil, and sweet incense. So it would have been a treat to simply walk around and take in the atmosphere. Speaking of smells, what do you think was the air like in ancient Carthage? Was it polluted and stinky, or did people back then care about keeping things clean? Find out in this video. The scent of fish. The smell of fish permeated the entire city of Carthage. It was unavoidable. For better or worse, fishing was not only an important source of food, but also a major part of the economy. In fact, Carthage was known as the granary of the Mediterranean. Its harbors teemed with activity as ships came and went, carrying cargo of dried fish, salted and smoked fish, and even fish sauce, a fermented concoction made from fish and salt that was used as a condiment. The process of salting and drying fish created a strong ammonia-like odor, and when you add the smell of decomposing fish to the mix, the result is a pungent aroma that is not for the faint of heart. This wasn't just a temporary problem either. This stench was present year-round and permeated every corner of the city. Even the finest homes with their marble floors and frescoed walls could not escape the smell of fish. Imagine trying to eat a tuna pie fresh out of the oven while the smell of rotting fish lingers in the air. It was a daily occurrence. You couldn't avoid it. You couldn't ignore it. All you could do was embrace it and hope that your sense of smell would eventually adapt. But let's be honest, if you're a visitor to Carthage, you probably won't stick around long enough to find out. The scent of olive oil, freshly baked bread, juicy grapes, and glistening olives. These were the staples of the Carthaginian diet. They were also the key ingredients in olive oil, a liquid gold that was used for everything from cooking to cleaning to anointing the bodies of kings. In fact, olive oil was so important to Carthage that they even had a special ceremony to welcome the first pressing of each year's harvest. The process of making olive oil was both labor-intensive and time-consuming. It took dozens of workers to pick the ripe olives, sort them by hand, crush them, and extract the precious liquid. Once pressed, the oil was stored in clay jars or bronze containers and used for a variety of purposes. Olive oil was an essential part of cooking, adding flavor and richness to dishes. It was also used as a lubricant for massages and to keep skin and hair healthy. But perhaps the most unusual use of olive oil was as a fuel source. That's right. The Carthaginians used olive oil lamps to light their homes and businesses. The oil was poured into a small bowl-like container with a wick and then hung from a hook in the ceiling. The flickering light provided a warm glow and a pleasant ambience, but it also gave off a strong, sometimes overwhelming odor. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of Carthage and being greeted by the scent of frying fish and fresh bread. The aroma of olive oil hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the sounds of bartering merchants and the laughter of children playing. It's a sensory overload that will leave you feeling disoriented and a little nauseated. And let's not forget about those pesky flies. They were drawn to the sweet smell of fermenting grapes and would often make their presence known by landing on your food or worse, your body. Trying to enjoy a meal in such an environment was a challenge, to say the least. But the smell of olive oil was not the only thing that could make you feel sick in ancient Carthage. There was also the smell of incense, the scent of incense. The air was thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense, a heady aroma that was meant to purify the air and ward off evil spirits. But to your modern nose, it smelled more like stale urine than holy water. In Carthage, incense was used everywhere and for everything. Homes and businesses were sprinkled with incense to keep them smelling fresh and to protect them from evil spirits. Weddings and funerals were filled with incense to honor the occasion and to appease the gods. Even the streets of Carthage had public incense burners to mask the stench of garbage and human waste. But all that incense had a dark side. Not only was it expensive, which made it inaccessible to the poor, but it was also dangerous. The fumes from burning incense were so strong that they could make you pass out or even go blind. Imagine walking through the crowded markets of Carthage, dodging vendors and their wares while trying not to breathe in too deeply. You can almost taste the sweet, cloying scent of incense on your tongue, but it quickly turns bitter in your mouth. Your eyes begin to water and your throat feels tight. You try to fan yourself with a piece of cloth, but it only makes things worse. The incense is everywhere and there is no escape. You start to feel dizzy and weak, and you can't help but wonder, am I in danger? What if I pass out in the middle of the market? Or worse, what if I go blind? You struggle to keep your senses, but the incense is relentless. It's overpowering your body's defenses and you can't fight it anymore. You collapse onto the nearest bench, gasping for breath, and you know you won't be staying in ancient Carthage for much longer. Language barriers. You thought you knew what a language barrier was until you tried to communicate in ancient Carthage. It was a melting pot of cultures, a place where traders from all over the Mediterranean came to buy and sell their wares. The dominant language was Phoenician, a Semitic language that was similar to Hebrew and Arabic. But since Carthage was a port city, it also had many sailors and merchants who spoke Greek and Latin. The result was a linguistic melting pot, a cacophony of languages that could make communication difficult, to say the least. Imagine arriving in Carthage excited to barter for rare spices and exotic fabrics. You might have studied Phoenician in preparation, but nothing could have prepared you for the reality of trying to converse with a vendor in a language that sounds like fingernails on a chalkboard. The words get jumbled together in a rapid-fire sequence that makes no sense to you. You try to slow them down, but they just stare at you blankly. Finally, you break out the sign language, but even that fails. The vendor just looks confused. After a few minutes of the charade, you decide to throw in the towel. Maybe it's just not worth the stress. But just then, A group of Greek merchants joins the conversation. You switch to Greek, thinking at least you understand that. But within seconds, you realize that this group is just as hard to understand as the Phoenicians. Their words tumble over each other, and you can't keep up. You start to feel frustrated and embarrassed. Is it too much to ask for a simple transaction without having to decode an entire language? Just as you're about to give up, a kind-faced woman approaches you. She speaks slowly and clearly in a language that you finally understand, Latin. But before you can celebrate your victory, she disappears into the crowd, leaving you alone again in the chaotic maelstrom of languages, slavery, and status. In ancient Carthage, there was no such thing as being colorblind. The city's inhabitants were well aware of the differences between fair and dark skin, and they used this knowledge to their advantage. The Carthaginians had a peculiar obsession with skin color. For them, it was more than just a physical trait. It was a sign of one's status and wealth. In fact, they took such pride in their unique complexions that they developed a scale to measure beauty based on the darkness or lightness of one's skin. Now, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with slavery? Well, the answer is everything. The Carthaginians believed that the darker one's skin, the lower their status in society, and this belief led them to develop a bizarre practice, buying slaves specifically for their pale skin. Can you imagine the audacity of enslaving someone solely for their skin color? It was not uncommon for wealthy Carthaginians to purchase slaves from Europe and other parts of the Mediterranean just because they had white skin. These slaves were treated like commodities, bought and sold in markets like cattle. Their lives were a living hell, forced to work long hours under harsh conditions, denied basic necessities, all for the pleasure of their master's obsession with their pale skin. Ritual obligations. The Carthaginians were a superstitious lot, that's for sure. They believed that their survival depended on appeasing their gods, and they spared no expense in doing so. Every day was filled with rituals and sacrifices. The main temple was dedicated to Baal Hammon, the god of the sky and earth, and it was here that the most important ceremonies took place. The high priest, a position held only by the most respected members of the community, would lead the rituals. They would burn incense, make offerings of gold and silver, and even sacrifice animals. But it wasn't just the priests who had to perform these rituals. Every Carthaginian was expected to do their part. Men, women, and children alike would offer prayers and sacrifices to the gods on a daily basis. And if you didn't do your part, well, you ran the risk of angering the gods and bringing misfortune upon yourself and your family. Imagine waking up early in the morning to perform your daily sacrifice to Baal Hammon. You gather the necessary materials, a small fire, some incense, and a few coins. You light the fire and place the incense on top, watching as the smoke drifts lazily upwards. You drop the coins into the flames, making a silent prayer for good fortune. But then you remember, you're not supposed to be here. You're not a Carthaginian. You're just a visitor. Suddenly, you feel exposed and vulnerable. What if someone recognizes you? What if they question your motives? You start to panic. You try to flee, but it's too late. The high priest spots you. He raises his hand and shouts, "Stop, thief! You're trapped." The guards close in on you, their faces grim. You struggle against them, but there's no escape. You've angered the gods. Now you will pay the price. The tension of being a merchant state, always looking outward. Carthage was a trading empire. It was built on the backs of merchants who braved the seas to bring back valuable goods from far-flung lands. But being a merchant in ancient Carthage came with its own set of challenges. For starters, the competition was fierce. There were thousands of merchants in the city, all vying for the same customers and goods. To succeed, you needed to be savvy, quick-witted, and able to haggle like a pro. Then there was the danger of piracy. The seas around Carthage were a notorious pirate haven. These ruthless marauders would attack unsuspecting ships, stealing their cargo and maybe even harming the crew. It was a risky business, but the potential rewards were just too great to ignore. You might have struck it big in your last voyage, but that doesn't mean you can rest easy. There's always someone out there looking to take what you have. The tension never lets up in Carthage. It's a constant game of cat and mouse. Merchants trying to outmaneuver each other to get the best deals. Pirates lurking in the shadows waiting for their chance to strike. And it's not just the outside world that you have to worry about. Carthage itself was a hotbed of intrigue and deception. The city's elite were constantly scheming and plotting, trying to get ahead. It was a dog-eat-dog world where trust was hard to come by and betrayal was commonplace. Imagine trying to relax after a long voyage, but you can't shake the feeling that someone is watching you, waiting for you to slip up. You glance around nervously, trying to spot the source of your unease. but it's no use. The threat is invisible, lurking just beneath the surface of everyday life in ancient Carthage. And inward, the tension didn't end at the city gates. It followed you inside. Life in ancient Carthage was a constant battle between order and chaos. The city was meticulously planned, a grid of streets and avenues designed to maximize efficiency. But the people of Carthage were anything but orderly. They were passionate, volatile, and quick to anger. Fights and arguments broke out regularly in the marketplaces, and the slightest insult could spark a full-blown riot. One minute you might be strolling through the bustling marketplace, admiring the colorful fabrics and exotic spices. The next, you're dodging flying objects and desperately trying to stay out of the line of fire. The noise is deafening, the crowds are crushing, and you can't help but wonder, how did it all kick off? But the tension doesn't stop at the markets. It follows you everywhere you go in ancient Carthage. Walking down the narrow streets, you feel the weight of history pressing down on you. The buildings are close together, the passageways are narrow, and there's a sense of urgency in the air. People are always on the move, rushing to complete their errands before disaster strikes. The slightest misstep could lead to disaster. The tiniest mistake could set off a chain reaction that ends in chaos. And it's not just the physical dangers that you have to worry about. There's also the constant threat of social disaster. The people of Carthage were fiercely proud of their culture and traditions, and they didn't take kindly to outsiders trying to change things. One wrong move and you could find yourself in the middle of a cultural clash, caught between two worlds that refuse to meet. The tension builds until it's almost tangible, and you can't help but feel like you're walking on eggshells. You wouldn't last a day in ancient Carthage. We think we know what it was like to live in ancient Carthage because of the Romans. They loved to paint a picture of debauchery and excess. If there were any truth to their claims, would you be able to survive? The year is to 27 BC. The place, a small village near the modern city of Granada. Hamilcar Barca walks down the main street. He doesn't belong here. His people shouldn't be here. For a decade, they have been marching across the known world, slowly pushing the Carthaginians out of Iberia. The Roman legions have defeated his army and taken his city, but he has survived. In fact, his army has survived. They just lost a war. It's not personal, he tells himself, and yet he can't help but think of all those men who died. Men like his brother Hasdrubal, men like his son Hannibal. Did it all mean nothing? Did all that death mean nothing? No, it means something. He will make them pay. One day he swears, one day. For now, he settles for retaking the city. They were only driven out by a coalition of Rome and their allies. But he doesn't care. If he needs to, he will assemble another coalition. He will fight Rome without an ally. Rome will regret that. He knows it deep in his bones. Hamilcar Barca was once a great general, one of Carthage's greatest ever. He led armies to victory against the Greeks, against the Etruscans, against the mercenary armies of Greece. But those were different times. This time he is older. The spark is gone from his eyes. Now there is only fire in them, a fire to burn Rome. But first, he must secure his base of operations, which is why he's here in this small village in Iberia. It is nothing more than a speck of dust on the map, a minor city in a minor province, but it will be enough. With time, he will turn it into the capital of New Carthage. He had fought 2 wars against Rome already, both times ending in bitter defeats. But if he can control Iberia, then he can use its wealth to raise an army powerful enough to defeat Rome. They will show these Romans who is boss. As he moves his family to the village, he tells Hannibal and his brother, Hasdrubal, to stay by his side always. The boy listens intently. He is only 9 years old, but he understands more than anyone else. What his father says, he will do. Soon, Hamilcar dies. Hannibal was only 14 when it happened, but even at that young age, he understood what needed to be done. He took his father's place. He rallied the tribes of Iberia behind him, and one by one, he pushed the mercenaries back into the sea, just like his father had done. But he wasn't interested in settling for less. He wanted more. He wanted to go to Rome itself and tear it down. But he also knew that he wasn't ready yet. He was too young. He had to wait. So he marched south. He secured Carthage's western provinces, Libya and Sicily. He did what his father had failed to do, take the city of Agrigentum in Sicily. And finally, he crossed into Italy, an army of 90 elephants strong, 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. They came over the Alps. Hannibal Barca didn't find the short way around the mountains. No, he wanted to send a message to Rome. He would rather lose half his army to the cold and hunger than give Rome a single advantage. He crossed the Alps. His army was exhausted, hungry, and now facing a river. On the other side was Rome. Soon, the scouts returned with news. Rome was prepared for battle. They had set up camp on the far side of the river. They had brought all their equipment. They were ready. Hannibal looked at his men, weary from their long march. "But what does it matter?" he asks them. "Do you see the enemy? They were ready. Do you see their supplies?" "Of course not," Hannibal shouted. "But I do. They are on the other side of the river. You cross this river, you smash them, and you take their supplies. Then we keep marching east. This is how we beat Rome." His army roared its approval. Even though they were tired, they would rip apart these Romans. It was a great battle. The Numidian cavalry smashed the Roman cavalry. The Gauls tore apart the Italian infantry. Elephants trampled all who got in their way. But the Romans had one thing Hannibal hadn't expected: discipline. When their formations broke, they reformed. When their men fell, they replaced them. The Romans adapted. By the end of the day, both sides had suffered terrible losses. But it was Rome who had lost more. Hannibal could see it in their movements, in their pace. They were tired. Hannibal stayed the night by the river, making sure his wounded could rest. At dawn, he moved his army forward again. Rome was still reeling from the previous day's battle. Hannibal attacked. This time, there was no resistance. The Romans fled, dropping their supplies as they ran. Hannibal's soldiers looted the camp, taking what they needed. They were exhausted and starving, so they ate whatever they could find, drank wine, and went to sleep. Next morning, they packed up and moved on. This time, they headed east. Rome had sent 2 legions to stop him, but they were no match for the Carthaginians. They tried to stop him at the Trebia River. There was another great battle. The Romans fought bravely, but the Carthaginians were too strong. Hannibal kept his promise. He destroyed the Roman army and took their supplies. He was halfway through Italy, but that wasn't the end of it. Rome would not let him pass. They pursued him. They ambushed him, tried to trap him, but Hannibal was ready for them. He gave them battle after battle, taking supplies each time, never letting them regroup. The fighting grew more intense. There were battles every month. Sometimes Hannibal would win. Sometimes the Romans would win. It didn't matter. They were weakening each other. Finally, Hannibal reached the gates of Rome. He had beaten their armies, taken their supplies, and outlasted their patience. But he didn't attack. He didn't sack the city. Instead, he raised his siege engines and catapults and started flinging rocks at the walls. The citizens of Rome panicked. They had never seen anything like this before. Where were the legions? Why weren't they stopping the invaders? They didn't know that the legions were being held back by orders. Rome's Senate didn't want to risk losing them. They offered Hannibal's army a noble surrender, promising him generous terms. Hannibal accepted. Now, according to the Romans, he packed up his belongings and left the city. They even let him keep his weapons and armor. But the truth is much uglier. After the battle, when Hannibal entered Rome, he found out that the Romans had betrayed him. They had hidden their women and children in the temples. But the Carthaginians had no interest in harming civilians. He treated the city as he had promised, looting and burning everything in sight. He killed the patricians, the senators, anyone who could influence the city. He destroyed Rome's treasury. He ripped down its temples and burned its palaces. He let his soldiers plunder the city for 3 days. Finally, when he was satisfied, he left the city. The Romans claimed that he spared the city because he admired its art and culture. The truth is much uglier. He had nothing left to plunder. He had looted everything, but he was not done with Rome yet. The next day, he returned to the city with an even larger army and laid siege to it. He starved the city for 6 months, but the Romans refused to surrender. Finally, after 6 months, he lifted the siege and marched away. But he would return. He would fight the Romans in their own lands. He would destroy their families, kill their generals, and humiliate their consuls. But that is a story for another day. There's no place like home. Home is where the heart is. It's your sanctuary from the outside world. And no matter how much we travel, all roads lead us back to our favorite place. But some people don't have that luxury. Some places are so dangerous that once you step foot inside its borders, you can never return home again. You would either be dead or something terrible would happen. Let's take a closer look at these locations. Welcome to my channel. And today let's find out why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Carthage. Our first location will take us to the country of Tunisia in the city of Carthage. In the late 9th century BC, the Phoenician civilization set up a trading post along the coast of North Africa. This trading post would become one of the most powerful empires in the Mediterranean, called Carthage. Their rivals would be the equally powerful Greeks and Romans. The empire was known for its wealth, military might and expansionist views. They built colonies all over the place, one of which would be the island of Malta. In fact, the Carthaginians were so powerful that at one point they even controlled the western Mediterranean. But this empire wouldn't last forever. As the centuries went by, their power would wane, and in 146 BC, Rome would destroy the city and turn it into a province of their own. But what led to their downfall? Well, that's not exactly clear. Throughout their history, there were civil wars, rebellions, and famines. In later years, Rome would also attack them several times. But did any of these events contribute to their destruction? Or was there another cause? In order to answer this question, we need to go to the ruins of Carthage. Spread throughout the country of Tunisia, archaeologists have found sections of the old empire. One of the most fascinating discoveries would be found in the Bir Sahil area. Here the ancient city would have its necropolis or cemetery. The findings here would change everything about the Carthaginians. But before we continue, if you want to help out the channel, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. But now let's continue. When you think of ancient burial grounds, what comes to mind? Stonehenges, mummies, or giant pyramids? Well, the ancient Carthaginians didn't do things like everyone else. What would become known as the Tophet was unlike anything seen before. Archaeologists found hundreds of children's skeletons buried in the ground. At first, they thought it was a mass grave from a horrible plague, but as they continued to excavate, they started to find more and more artifacts. Many of the skeletons had small bowls and jewelry placed next to them. Some of the remains had chariots and horses buried with them. Even more shocking was the discovery of ibises. For anyone who doesn't know what an ibis is, it's a type of bird that lives in Africa. During ancient times, they were considered sacred animals, and many cultures viewed them as divine creatures. To the Egyptians, they symbolized rebirth and the afterlife. So having these birds buried with children was very strange. After all, children weren't pharaohs or kings, and that's when the rumors started to spread. Many historians started to believe that the Carthaginians practiced child sacrifice. They theorized that these innocent children were taken away from their parents and then thrown into a fire. But this isn't certain. One theory to explain these burials is that the Carthaginians believed that children could ascend to heaven if they died young. This may have been their way of giving their children a better life after death. Another explanation is that the ibises represented the god Baal-Hamon. They may have sacrificed the children to this deity to ensure good crops and a successful year. There's even the possibility that both theories played a role in their actions. The truth is, we just don't know what happened. But one thing is for sure, those children didn't die from a horrible plague. To make matters worse, excavations have found small clay figurines with the heads of ibises. These figures are believed to represent the priests of Baal-Hamon. Next to them were various weapons used during sacrifices, and these artifacts only fueled the fire for those who wanted to destroy Carthage. If there was any group of people who hated the Carthaginians, it was the Romans, and they used every excuse they could to attack them. And the rumors of child sacrifice gave them the perfect excuse. They used these stories to portray the Carthaginians as evil and savage. But is there any truth to these claims? Unfortunately, yes. Further excavations have uncovered more evidence of human sacrifice. The Carthaginians may have buried these children as a normal practice, but the Romans didn't care about that. They viewed every death as a murder, and this ultimately led to their destruction. After centuries of war, the Romans finally defeated the Carthaginians. They burned the city to the ground and enslaved the population. They even went as far as destroying the evidence. The Romans destroyed as many historical artifacts as they could. They also tried to erase the memory of the Carthaginians. But luckily, some artifacts survived. Thanks to these items, we're able to get a glimpse into their culture. We now know that the Carthaginians weren't just a bunch of savages. They had their own religion and beliefs, just like every other civilization. They had great works of art and architecture, but all of that didn't matter to the Romans. They only saw the bad side of their culture. The Romans only remembered the alleged child sacrifice and used it against them. But it wasn't just the Romans who hated the Carthaginians. To this day, many people hate the very mention of the Tophet. Some people believe that the spirits of these children roam the earth looking for revenge. Others say that the artifacts shouldn't have been disturbed in the first place. Because of this, many people refuse to visit the site. The ones who have gone there claim to experience strange occurrences. They've reported seeing shadows and hearing whispers in the wind. Some people even claim to see the ghosts of children running around the archaeological site. It's hard to say whether these stories are true or not, but one thing is for sure, it's a very mysterious place. If you were to visit the site, what would you think? Would you try to learn about the Carthaginians and their history? Or would you run away screaming? Let us know in the comments below. Now let's move on to our next topic. No to death by rat. Everyone loves pets. We love taking care of them and spending time with them. Some of the best moments in our lives were captured thanks to our furry friends. But unfortunately, some people are allergic to animals. That's why they prefer to stay away from them. But believe it or not, this allergy could be deadly. Back in ancient Carthage, there was a gruesome way to die. And it all started with rats. Back in the day, there weren't really trash cans. People just threw their garbage wherever they wanted. This resulted in the streets being filthy, and these rodents were everywhere. And because there were so many rats, people started getting bitten, and these bites were infected. That's when things got real bad. These bites turned into ulcers and covered the body. Eventually, the victim would die and their flesh would rot. The worst part of it all, it was extremely painful. Imagine being eaten alive by rats. That's what happened to those who died in the streets. And as you can imagine, people were terrified of going outside. The whole city was in a panic, and this continued for years. Scientists believe that these rats came from ships that traveled the seas. Since Carthage was a port city, it made it easy for the rodents to breed. They arrived in large numbers and caused absolute havoc. So the citizens of Carthage did whatever they could to protect themselves. They wore protective clothing and carried weapons. The bravest even went out into the streets to hunt down the rodents. But no matter what they did, they couldn't win. The rats had already taken over. As the years passed, the rat problem got worse. Then something horrible happened. The rats started to swim. That's right. These little guys started swimming through the sewers and attacking people in their homes. Now people were completely helpless. No one could escape the rats. They were too fast and too vicious. In the end, the entire city suffered. Their health declined and food shortages became rampant. The rat infestation lasted for years, and eventually the city of Carthage would be destroyed. Whether you live in ancient times or modern times, rats are a scary thing. So please stay tuned for more videos about weird ancient places. Carthage, the great rival of Rome, a trading powerhouse that grew to become one of the richest cities in the ancient Mediterranean. It's easy to think of it as a kind of wealthy utopia, but we all know how it ended. So what did the people who lived there do for fun? Did they just sit around counting their money and recruiting mercenaries until Rome showed up? Hi, everyone. Welcome to my channel, where we bring you new episodes every week exploring the world's most influential civilizations. Today we're answering the question, why wouldn't you last a day in ancient Carthage? Viewer suggested by Tarquinia. Carthage was a very different place from ancient Rome, and if you haven't already done so, check out our series on Rome, which is linked below. As always, you can find references to everything mentioned in the video in the description. Ancient Carthage is one of the most intriguing civilizations in all of history. How could a colony of merchants build such a powerful empire only to lose it to the Romans in less than a century? It's hard not to feel a little bad for them, especially when we consider that their destruction brought about centuries of warfare and hardship upon the entire Mediterranean. But while Rome may have been the victors in the end, their rivalry with Carthage at its peak made it one of the most important cities in the Mediterranean. The Phoenician city of Carthage was founded in the late 9th century BCE by the Phoenicians from Tyre. Carthage became a major center for trade in the western Mediterranean, especially after the collapse of the great trading network centered around the Egyptians. Its location on the coast of modern Tunisia made it an ideal base for shipping. But the exact details of how this trading network operated are murky. What we know comes almost entirely from Roman sources, many of whom were written long after the destruction of Carthage. A lot of the detail is likely exaggerated or outright fabricated. There is some debate among scholars regarding how much autonomy Carthage had from its parent city of Tyre. Some believe that Carthage was a semi-autonomous colony, with a significant degree of internal self-governance. Others believe that it was more heavily influenced by its parent city, and that decisions were often made on its behalf by Tyrian officials. The Phoenician alphabet, adapted from the Canaanite script, was brought with them and would later be adapted again to form the Latin alphabet, used by the Romans. They also brought their skills in manufacturing purple dye, which came from the Murex sea snail, as well as their expertise in glassmaking and metalwork. Because of its access to resources in Spain, northern Africa, and Italy, Carthage became incredibly rich. At its height, estimates suggest that the population of Carthage numbered somewhere around 700,000, making it one of the largest cities in the ancient world. But even at its greatest, the city was not a democracy. Power in Carthage was concentrated in the hands of a small group of merchant nobles, known as the Sephites, which translates as judges or elders. The number of Sephites varied over time, but there were generally between 30 and 100 members of the council. Members of the council were elected annually, and the position was considered a sort of civic duty and an honor rather than a career. The council was assisted by a magistrate known as the Barchan, who was responsible for enforcing the laws and maintaining order. Each member of the council was required to own at least 200 acres of land and have a net worth of at least 8,000 talents, which was quite wealthy even by today's standards. There was no king, but there was a hereditary high priestess whose role was largely ceremonial. She acted as a link to the past and ensured that traditional customs and religious practices were maintained. So why wouldn't you last a day in ancient Carthage? Well, firstly, you wouldn't fit in. While we tend to think of ancient civilizations as monolithic blocks of societies that are uniform and homogeneous, the reality was much more complex. There were ethnic enclaves within larger cities in places like Greece and Rome, and that was true of Carthage too. Despite being a Phoenician colony, Carthage was home to a wide variety of people, including natives of North Africa, Spain, and Italy. Many of these people would have spoken their native languages, though Phoenician was likely the lingua franca for trade. Carthage was multilingual long before Alexander the Great ever set foot in the eastern Mediterranean. And so unless you spoke Phoenician, chances are you probably weren't going to fit in. Not only would you stick out like a sore thumb, but your life would likely be in danger. Carthage was a slave-based economy. Slavery was integral to the wealth and prosperity of Carthage and other Phoenician city-states. Slaves were used extensively in agriculture, mining, and manufacturing, as well as in households throughout the city. This created a huge divide between the ruling class and the rest of society. So unless you were one of the privileged few, your life would be pretty tough. In addition to the rigid social hierarchy, there were also strict laws and punishments in Carthage. The Carthaginians took pride in their law and order, and anyone who broke the law was dealt with harshly. Looting, for example, was punishable by the death penalty. They took their commitment to law and order so far that they built a large prison outside the city walls for those awaiting trial. Slaves and foreigners were held in a separate prison inside the city. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Carthaginian society was its commitment to honor and revenge. The concept of honor was central to Carthaginian culture, and insults and injuries were seen as challenges to one's honor that had to be avenged. This led to a culture of violence and revenge, which permeated all levels of society. So if you insulted someone or were suspected of wrongdoing, you might find yourself in a duel or worse. To make matters worse, Carthage was a militaristic society. The military was highly valued, and young men were expected to serve in the army from a young age. This created a culture of aggression and violence, which was encouraged by the ruling elite. The military was also a source of national pride, and the Carthaginian army was considered to be one of the most powerful in the Mediterranean. The Second Punic War saw Hannibal Barca lead his war elephants across the Alps to attack Rome itself. Whether you were a merchant looking to expand your trade routes, or a general leading an army into battle, violence was never far from the surface. If you somehow managed to avoid the pitfalls of daily life in Carthage, you might have thought that you made it, but you'd be wrong. You wouldn't last a day because Carthage was built on a swamp. Yeah, it really was. Most people think of ancient cities as having been built on some kind of natural isthmus or peninsula, but in the case of Carthage, it was literally built from nothing. Over the centuries, it grew from a tiny fishing village to one of the largest cities in the Mediterranean. Much of that growth occurred on low-lying marshland along the coast. In fact, the modern-day site of Carthage is actually on an artificial island. Legend has it that the area was initially cleared of swamps and marshes by the Phoenicians. When they arrived, however, over time, the swamps began to return and the city became notorious for its stench. We know that during the First Punic War, the Romans complained bitterly about the smell. Even worse, the low-lying land was prone to flooding, which not only caused damage to property and infrastructure, but also spread disease and caused outbreaks of deadly epidemics. The combination of disease, poverty, and crime made the city a very dangerous place to live. The Carthaginians were well aware of the problems that plagued their city, and they made several attempts to address them. They built dikes and drainage channels to try to control the flooding, and they passed laws to try to limit the spread of disease. But these measures were never fully effective and the city continued to suffer from the effects of its geography. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep while the streets flooded, and the stench of decay filled the air. It's no wonder that many people died in Carthage. Merchants and trade were at the heart of Carthage's power, but that meant that the city relied on the goodwill of others to survive. With no allies to speak of, Carthage was surrounded by potential enemies. The Carthaginians were constantly at war with the Greeks to the east and the Etruscans to the north. Not only that, but Carthage's main trading partner was Rome. When Rome entered the scene, the balance of power shifted and the rivalry turned violent. The Romans proved to be fierce competitors in the Mediterranean, and they eventually eclipsed Carthage's power and influence. The Romans exploited Carthage's geographical weaknesses to their advantage, bombarding the city with catapults and siege engines. They also used psychological tactics to demoralize the Carthaginian defenders. The Romans knew that the Carthaginians relied on trade and economic activity to sustain themselves, so they deliberately disrupted this activity, hoping to starve the city into submission. Their goal was to break the will of the Carthaginians and force them to surrender without putting up a fight. In this way, the Romans were able to defeat Carthage and bring an end to one of the most powerful and influential cities in the Mediterranean. Today we're exploring why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Carthage and other ancient cities. Viewer discretion is advised for this video, as some of this video may be offensive or disturbing. We, the makers of this video, in no way support or condone the actions of the subjects featured. Ancient Carthage, the great rival of ancient Rome, stretches back to around 814 BCE when it was founded by Phoenician colonists from Tyre. Its strategic location on the Mediterranean coast of North Africa made it a hub of trade and cultural exchange between the eastern and western parts of the Mediterranean. At its peak, the city covered an area of around 325 square kilometers and had a population of about 750,000 people. But life in this bustling metropolis wasn't all smooth sailing, so let us embark on a journey through time and find out what it would be like if you were transported back to ancient Carthage, and why you might not make it through a single day. You are now standing in the heart of ancient Carthage. Stretching before you is the impressive Byrsa Hill, which served as the citadel of the city. As you walk along the ramparts, you can see the massive gate known as the Elephant's Gate, which was constructed during the reign of Hannibal Barca in the 3rd century BC. It got its name because two enormous statues of elephants adorned the structure. From here, you have a panoramic view of the surrounding area, including the beautiful Stapendy Lake, also known as Lake Tunis today. The lake was a crucial part of the city's water supply and played a significant role in daily life. In ancient times, the lake was also used for naval battles and even housed a small fleet of warships. Now that you've explored the citadel, it's time to venture into the bustling port area of ancient Carthage. Imagine yourself on a massive cargo ship filled with valuable goods from distant lands. The ship has just docked at one of the many wharves and you're eager to unload your precious cargo and start trading. Suddenly, you hear a loud commotion coming from the shore. A group of soldiers is arguing with a merchant over the price of some imported spices. The merchant claims that the spices are worth their weight in gold, but the soldiers insist that the price is too high. Tempers flare, and before you know it, the situation spirals out of control. The merchant draws his sword and lunges at the soldier. The fight quickly turns into a brawl, and soon other merchants and dock workers join in. The soldiers are outnumbered and overwhelmed. One of them gets injured and falls to the ground with a nasty cut on his arm. Seeing that the situation is getting out of hand, you decide to step in and try to restore order. But as you attempt to break up the fight, a stray sword slashes across your leg. Blood starts pouring down your leg and you realize that you have just been wounded in a vicious fight over imported spices. Infrastructure. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the city, you find yourself walking along the main road of ancient Carthage. Everywhere you look, there is evidence of the city's wealth and prosperity. On either side of the road, you see grand mansions belonging to the elite class, each one more opulent than the last. But as you continue your walk, you notice a stark contrast between the opulence of the rich and the squalor of the poor. The further you venture away from the city center, the more dilapidated the buildings become. Eventually you come across a rundown shack made of mud and straw, home to a family living in abject poverty. Inside the shack, you see a mother trying to feed her malnourished children while they sit on the dirt floor. Their clothes are dirty and tattered, and their bodies are covered in sores and open wounds. You feel a pang of sympathy for these people and you wish you could help them, but you're not sure what you can do. Suddenly, one of the children looks up at you with pleading eyes and asks for food or water. What will you do? Will you share your resources with those in need, or will you turn a blind eye to their suffering and walk away? Maritime engineering. the harbor of 1,000 ships. Imagine yourself standing on a rocky outcrop overlooking the vast harbor of ancient Carthage. The scene before you is both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Hundreds of ships from all corners of the known world are docked here, their masts like the branches of an immense forest. The air is thick with the smell of salt, sweat, and exotic spices. As you watch, longboats laden with precious metals arrive from Spain. Elegant vessels carrying fine fabrics sail in from Greece, and sturdy cargo ships loaded with grain and wine pull into the docks from Italy. In the distance, you can see mighty warships, their sails billowing in the wind, ready to defend Carthage's vast empire. Closer to shore, smaller boats shuttle back and forth, ferrying passengers and goods between the ships and the bustling city. With so much wealth and activity concentrated in such a small area, the harbor is a place of both opportunity and danger. Will you be able to navigate the treacherous waters of this ancient metropolis without losing everything? Agriculture and trade. You wake up early in the morning to the sounds of birds chirping and farm animals calling. You live in a small village on the outskirts of ancient Carthage. Your family and the other villagers rely on farming and trading goods to survive. Today you and your brother are in charge of bringing fresh produce to the market in Carthage. You load up your donkey with eggs, cheese, olives, and bread, then set off on the long walk to the city. The road is dusty and bumpy, but you're excited to see the sights and sounds of ancient Carthage. As you approach the city gates, you see a long line of farmers and traders waiting to enter. Some of them are trying to sneak in illegally, and you're worried that you might get caught up in the commotion. Suddenly, a group of soldiers approaches and begins checking everyone's goods. They're looking for contraband, and anyone caught smuggling items into the city could be severely punished. Will you be able to keep your cool and convince the soldiers that your goods are legitimate and that you deserve to sell them in the marketplace? Or will you panic and make a mistake that could get you into serious trouble? Craftsmen and merchants, you find yourself in the bustling marketplace of ancient Carthage. Stalls overflow with colorful fabrics, fragrant spices, and glistening jewelry. The air buzzes with the energy of merchants hawking their wares and customers bargaining for the best deals. You're here to sell your handcrafted sandals, but you quickly realize that competition is fierce. Another merchant is trying to sell sandals identical to yours for half the price. His trick is to use cheaper materials that will fall apart after a few weeks, forcing his customers to buy new pairs more frequently. If you don't do something to stand out, nobody will buy your sandals. How will you outsmart the competition and make sales in this cutthroat marketplace? Will you try to match the low prices and risk making a loss on every sale? Or will you focus on the quality of your sandals and convince customers that they're worth paying a premium for? Religion and philosophy. As you wander through the bustling streets of ancient Carthage, you hear the rhythmic chanting of priests and the murmur of worshippers. You come across a large temple complex dedicated to Baal Hammon, the supreme god of Carthage. The temple is adorned with intricate carvings and vibrant colors, and the air is heavy with incense. Inside, you see worshippers kneeling before the altar, offering sacrifices and praying for their god's favor. As you observe the rituals, you feel a growing unease. You remember stories of the brutality and human sacrifices that take place within these very walls. Suddenly, a priest approaches you, his eyes gleaming with fanaticism. He invites you to participate in the ceremony and offers you the chance to make a wish. If your wish is granted, you'll be rewarded with unimaginable blessings. But if you refuse, you'll face the wrath of the gods. Do you accept the priest's invitation and risk angering the gods if your wish is not granted? Or do you decline the offer and brave the consequences? Rulers and conquerors. The year is 146 BC, and you are in the center of ancient Carthage, where the mighty armies of Rome have just arrived to put an end to the once great city. The Romans have been eyeing Carthage for years, jealous of its power and wealth, and now it's your job to defend the city against their invasion. But you're not alone in this battle. The heat is stifling, and the cries of the wounded mingle with the clash of steel. You hold your shield up against the onslaught of arrows, watching as your fellow citizens fall all around you. But you keep fighting, hoping that somehow you and Carthage will prevail. But deep down, you know that the odds are stacked against you, despite the valiant efforts of its citizens. Carthage is doomed, and soon you'll be swept up in the tide of Roman conquest, forever changing the course of history. Carthage was an ancient city and civilization that existed around the Mediterranean Sea. From around the 8th century BC to the 3rd century BC, the height of its power occurred during the period known as the Punic Wars, between Carthage and Rome, where it controlled vast territories in North Africa, Western Mediterranean islands, and coastal regions. But what would it have been like to live there? What were the cities like? How did people get around? And what kind of things could you expect to see if you took a walk down the street? Let's find out in today's episode of Why You Wouldn't Last a Day. You are in for an absolute treat today. This is part 3 of our series, exploring life in the ancient world by breaking down various elements of their civilizations. So far, we have done 2 videos about life in ancient Egypt and Rome. We've had thousands of comments and messages about doing one on Carthage, so here we are. As always, this is going to be a lot of fun, so let's get into it. The first thing you should know about Carthage is that they were extremely well-traveled and had many colonies across the Mediterranean. So while most people think of Carthage as being just this one city in North Africa, that isn't quite true. They had colonies all throughout the Mediterranean. These included major areas in Spain, including the Balearic Islands, Sicily and Sardinia, as well as small trade posts all over the coast of France, Britain, Italy, Malta, the Aegean Islands, the Levant and the Eastern Mediterranean, and even along the coast of Africa as far south as Morocco. This means that no matter where you went in the Mediterranean at this time, chances are you would encounter some kind of Carthaginian influence, whether it be a merchant, a temple, or a trading post. Now, when discussing these colonies, it is important to remember that not every colony is created equal. There were 3 different levels of colonies. The first type of colony was the most common, and it was basically just a trading post. This was usually just a fortified structure with some warehouses attached to it that was run by a small number of merchants. Their main purpose was to store goods while ships were being repaired or while the crew took a break. Sometimes the trading post would also serve as a small port for boats and ships. The next level up was a full-fledged colony. These were typically founded by groups of merchants or aristocrats who wanted to settle somewhere other than Carthage. Unlike the trading post, which was only used temporarily, colonies were meant to be permanent settlements. Some of these colonies even became major cities in their own right, such as Gades, the modern-day Cadiz, and Olbia in Sardinia. The third and final type of colony was the military colony. As we all know, Carthage had a huge navy, and with it came the need to protect their colonies and trade routes. Military colonies were typically founded near areas of strategic importance, such as choke points in a strait or near heavily trafficked trade routes. Because of their strategic importance, military colonies often had larger garrisons than the other colonies. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Carthaginian colonial web is the effect it had on the people who lived in those colonies. As we discussed in the last video, the Phoenicians did not conquer the areas where they established colonies. Instead, they preferred to trade and negotiate with the local populations. This led to a lot of cultural exchange between the Phoenicians and the native peoples. And over time, this led to the erosion of Phoenician culture and the creation of something new and unique, the Carthaginian identity. This process of cultural exchange was especially evident in the colonies that were founded by non-Phoenician peoples, such as the Greeks. In many cases, the Greeks would adopt the Phoenician alphabet and adapt it to their own language. For example, the Greek alphabet is derived from the Phoenician alphabet. This process of cultural exchange also led to the spread of new technologies and ideas. For example, the Phoenicians were known for their expertise in shipbuilding and navigation, and they shared their knowledge with the Greeks. This helped the Greeks to establish their own colonies and trading networks around the Mediterranean. Overall, the effect of the colonial web on the people who lived in Carthage's sphere of influence was profound. It led to the creation of new cultures, the spread of new technologies and ideas, and the emergence of new identities. Speaking of trade, one of the main reasons why Carthage became so powerful was because of their control of the Western Mediterranean trade routes. This gave them access to raw materials and finished goods from all over the Mediterranean. And as we discussed in our video about daily life in ancient Rome, this made it easy for them to acquire things like grain and slaves. However, this also meant that many goods were available to purchase in Carthage that wouldn't have been seen back in Phoenicia. For example, metals like silver and gold were much more abundant in the Western Mediterranean due to the presence of mines in Spain and other areas. This meant that Carthaginians had much more access to these precious metals than the Phoenicians did. Additionally, the climate of the Western Mediterranean was much more favorable than that of the Levant. This allowed for the growth of crops such as olives, grapes, and wheat, which were in high demand in colder areas of the Mediterranean. This meant that farmers in Carthage's colonies in Spain and North Africa could make a profit by selling these goods to the Carthaginians. Finally, the sea itself was a source of wealth for the Carthaginians. The waters around the Mediterranean were rich in fish and other seafood, and the Carthaginians developed a thriving fishing industry. This provided the population of Carthage with a source of protein, and also provided an additional source of income. So if you were walking through the markets of Carthage, you would have seen all kinds of goods from around the Mediterranean, from the fish caught off the coast of Spain to the grain grown in Sicily. When it comes to transportation within Carthage, there were three main methods: walking, animal riding, and boat riding. Walking was obviously the most common way to get around for the average citizen. However, animals played a major role in transportation, whether it be for riding or pulling carts and wagons. Donkeys and elephants were popular choices for this. Donkeys were used for riding and pulling light loads, while elephants were reserved for heavier loads and warfare. Boats, of course, were the primary mode of transportation for the Carthaginians, especially given their seafaring history. On the smaller end, you would have seen canoes and rowing boats being used both for fishing and transportation. Larger ships were used for trade and warfare. The Carthaginians were masters of shipbuilding, and their ships were known throughout the Mediterranean for their speed and maneuverability. One of the most interesting aspects of Carthaginian society was their use of slaves. As we touched on earlier, the Carthaginians acquired many slaves through trade with the Greeks and also through conquest. Slaves were a fundamental part of the economy of Carthage, providing the labor necessary to support the city's large population and its thriving trade network. They were used in almost every aspect of Carthaginian life, from agriculture to mining to domestic service. The use of slaves allowed the elite class of Carthage to maintain their wealth and power, as they were able to acquire goods and resources without having to do the labor themselves. This ultimately contributed to the development of Carthage into a major commercial and naval power. The Punic Wars between Carthage and Rome would be a good example of how important slaves were to the Carthaginians. Despite being defeated, the Carthaginians still managed to put up a fierce fight against the Romans because they had a strong military force. A big part of this military force was their cavalry, which was equipped with war chariots pulled by horses. Horses were very expensive, but the Carthaginians were willing to pay the price, because they knew that a strong cavalry force would be essential in any conflict with the Romans. The use of horses in war was nothing new. They had been used for centuries in various cultures. However, the Carthaginians took it to a new level with their war chariots. They were not only fast and maneuverable, but also deadly. Each chariot was equipped with several soldiers, each armed with a spear or sword, making them a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. The Carthaginians' reliance on horses and chariots also had a significant impact on their society. It led to the development of specialized skills and professions, such as horse training and chariot driving. This in turn created a social hierarchy, with those who could afford to own and maintain horses and chariots having a higher status than those who couldn't. Overall, the use of horses in ancient Carthage played a significant role in their military success and their society as a whole. As we said before, unlike Egypt or Rome, Carthage wasn't really a center of innovation, instead adopting a lot of things from other civilizations. However, one thing they did invent was their alphabet. The Phoenician alphabet was one of the first alphabets ever created. It consisted of 22 letters, each representing a different sound. This was a significant departure from the previous writing systems that were in use at the time, such as the Egyptian hieroglyphics. The Phoenician alphabet was much more practical and easier to use, which contributed to its widespread adoption throughout the Mediterranean. The alphabet eventually evolved into the Greek alphabet, from which the Roman and Cyrillic alphabets are derived. This makes the Phoenician alphabet one of the most influential inventions in human history. Carthage, a major power in the ancient Mediterranean whose existence is mostly known through its war with Rome, but which also had ties with Greece and even the Celts. Its history was quite impressive until it met its demise in the Punic Wars against Rome. But it was no easy feat for Rome to defeat Carthage because the Carthaginians were tough, organized and powerful, and this toughness, organization and power extended to their culture and society, too. So today we're going to look at some aspects of Carthaginian society that will make you glad you never ended up there or maybe sorry that you left so soon. Number 10. History. Carthaginian women and silent power. Though rarely documented, women appear in grave goods, religious dedications and trade. The priestesses, the wives of generals, and the mothers who sent sons to fight in Rome all offer us a glimpse into the lives of women in Carthage. They seem to have enjoyed more freedom than their Greek counterparts, but lived under the control of men. In some cases, women could own property, manage businesses, and participate in religious festivals. However, they also had arranged marriages and were expected to be subservient to male authority, whether it was her father, husband, or son. Still, they did have the right to refuse the arranged marriage. If she did, the woman would be put in an elite class of women called the Celestials, who devoted their lives to religion. As for prostitutes, they were viewed as outcasts, unlike in many other societies where prostitution was a respected profession. However, many high-status women may have turned to prostitution during times of war or crisis to help support themselves and their families. No. 9. Hannibal Barca, one of the greatest military commanders in history. Hannibal Barca is one of the most famous figures from Carthage, known for his military brilliance and leading the Carthaginians during the Second Punic War. He almost single-handedly gave Rome a run for its money. He's gone down in history for crossing the Alps with elephants and defeating Roman legions. But what many don't know is he almost didn't happen. His father, Hamilcar Barca, named him commander-in-chief after himself, and his brother Hasdrubal the Fair were killed in battle. Hannibal was only 26 years old when he took charge. His first order was to sacrifice 2 of his brothers to the gods of Carthage, Balhaman and Melkart, fulfilling a vow made by his father. This cemented Hannibal's reputation as a great leader and strategist, and showed the lengths to which people in ancient times went to fulfill their religious duties. 8. Gods of Carthage, the divine pantheon. Carthage had its own divine pantheon, which differed slightly from that of Greece and Rome. While the Romans adapted many of their deities from the Greeks, the Carthaginians developed their own distinct set of gods and goddesses. One of their most prominent deities was Baal, a weather god associated with rain, fertility, and thunder. He was worshipped throughout the Levant and North Africa, and was often depicted as a bull. Another important deity was Astarte, a goddess of love and fertility. She was believed to have originated in the Phoenician city of Tyre, and was sometimes identified with the Greek goddess Aphrodite. The Carthaginians also venerated Melkart, a god of the sea and patron of sailors. He was considered a supreme deity, and was syncretized with the Greek god Zeus. Tanit was another prominent goddess, possibly a local Libyan deity who became associated with the Phoenicians. She was depicted with a crown and a necklace and was often invoked for protection. The Carthaginians also worshipped a number of minor deities, including the 7 council gods who were believed to govern human affairs. 7. Religion. Religious practices played a significant role in the lives of the Carthaginians. Much like in many other ancient societies, they believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses, many of whom were also worshipped by the Phoenicians and other Mediterranean cultures. The Carthaginians kept many of their religious beliefs and customs despite being influenced by the Greeks and even the Romans to some extent. Animal sacrifice was a common practice in their religious rituals, with offerings made to various deities. The most notable examples are probably the hundreds of infant sacrifices recorded by the Romans, though these were likely exaggerated propaganda meant to demonize Carthage, given the nearby presence of child molesters like the Romans. Also, as mentioned earlier, the Carthaginians also practiced divination, interpreting signs and omens from animals and the natural world to gain insight into the will of the gods. This practice was used to guide important decisions, both on an individual level and for larger enterprises such as military campaigns. Religious festivals and processions were also an integral part of life in Carthage. These events brought the community together and provided opportunities for public displays of piety and devotion. 6. Economy, trade, and luxury. Carthage was renowned for its wealth and luxury, largely due to its strategic location on the Mediterranean coast of North Africa. This prime position allowed them to develop a robust economy centered around trade and commerce. Their trading network stretched far and wide, connecting them with regions like the Aegean Sea, Spain, and even the British Isles. Through this extensive trade, the Carthaginians acquired valuable resources such as silver, ivory, and exotic animals. These imports not only contributed to their own wealth, but also made them a hub for luxury goods in the region. But it wasn't just about acquiring riches. The Carthaginians excelled in craftsmanship and produced high-quality goods of their own, including textiles, metalwork, and glasswork. Their ships were renowned for their size and durability, making them a powerful force in maritime trade. In fact, their dominance in the western Mediterranean was so pronounced that they came to be known as the Carthaginian Sea. 5. Society. Carthago was home to a diverse and multifaceted society comprising several distinct ethnic groups within its territory. Despite these differences, the inhabitants of Carthago shared a common identity as Carthaginians and adopted the Phoenician language as their primary language of communication. This linguistic unity helped to forge a sense of shared identity among the diverse population. The Carthaginian society was structured with a hierarchical system, with the ruling class at the top. followed by merchants, artisans, and laborers. Slavery was also prevalent in Carthaginian society, and slaves were often employed in agriculture, mining, and domestic service. Religion played a significant role in the daily lives of Carthaginians, and their beliefs and practices influenced various aspects of their society. The city was also well planned with distinct neighborhoods, each with its own character and function. For example, the Byrse Hill was the political and religious center of the city, while the suburb of Collis was known for its commercial activity. 4. Military organization and warfare. The Carthaginian military was a formidable force, effectively utilizing infantry, cavalry, and most notably, war elephants. Their military tactics were innovative and adaptable, allowing them to compete against powerful rivals such as the Greeks and ultimately the Romans. They also strategically formed alliances with local tribes and communities to bolster their forces and achieve their objectives. Hannibal Barca's invasion of Italy during the Second Punic War showcased the might of the Carthaginian military, displaying their ability to maneuver across challenging terrains, including the Alps. The use of war elephants caught the Italians off guard and proved highly effective on the battlefield, instilling fear in their opponents. The Carthaginians understood the importance of intelligence gathering and employed spies and scouts to gather information on their enemies. This information was crucial in formulating their strategies and gaining the upper hand in battles. Overall, the Carthaginian military legacy serves as a testament to their strategic prowess and adaptability in the face of various challenges. 3. Government. The government of Carthage was a unique blend of monarchy, aristocracy, and elements of democracy. It featured a complex system of governance with a council of elders known as the Senate playing a central role in decision-making. Magistrates were appointed to oversee various aspects of governance and law enforcement, ensuring the smooth functioning of the state. Carthage also maintained a standing army to protect its interests and defend its territory. This military force was composed of both professional soldiers and citizen levies, allowing them to respond effectively to external threats. The Carthaginians recognized the importance of maintaining order and security within their city. They established a police force responsible for upholding law and order, preventing crime, and maintaining public safety. Additionally, Carthage implemented a sophisticated system of weights and measures to ensure fairness in commercial transactions. This attention to detail reflected their commitment to justice and the rule of law. 2. Architecture. Carthaginian architecture was primarily utilitarian in nature, with buildings designed to serve specific functions rather than purely aesthetic purposes. Their houses were usually simple structures with courtyards and gardens, providing a sense of openness and connection to nature. Public buildings such as temples and administrative offices were constructed from stone and decorated with intricate carvings and sculptures. These architectural elements showcased the skills of Carthaginian artisans and their ability to create aesthetically pleasing structures while serving their practical purposes. The city of Carthage itself was well planned with distinct residential, commercial, and religious districts. The Tafet, an area near the harbor, was a sacred precinct dedicated to child sacrifice, reflecting the religious practices of the time. 1. Legacy. Despite its eventual destruction, Carthage left an enduring legacy on the Mediterranean world. Its influence on trade, culture, and warfare continued to resonate even after its demise. The city's strategic location on the Mediterranean coast ensured that its impact would be felt long after its fall. Carthaginian innovations in navigation and shipbuilding had a lasting impact on maritime trade, connecting distant regions and fostering cultural exchange. Their contributions to the development of seafaring and exploration played a pivotal role in shaping the course of Mediterranean history. Overall, the Carthaginians left an indelible mark on the ancient world, their achievements and legacy continuing to captivate historians and scholars even today. Why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Carthage? Welcome back to my channel. It's me, and today we're answering the extraordinary. Why wouldn't you last a day in ancient Carthage? Do you know history? Prove it. What do you know about the city of Carthage? What do you think is its most defining feature? If you were to ask me before writing this video, I'd probably have told you something about Hannibal, or maybe that they had the biggest navy in the Mediterranean for a while there. But after reading several books on this subject, I've come to a different conclusion. Carthage was an empire built on trade, but their existence was one long conflict with their great rival, Rome. We will be looking at both sides today, so let's jump right into it. But first, if you like learning about history from a new perspective, then make sure you subscribe to our channel so you never miss an upload. Now let's go back to Carthage. Into 64 BC, The Romans went to war with the people of Syracuse, and the mercenaries of Carthage took part in the fighting, helping the Syracusans beat back the Romans. This would spark the beginning of Rome's war against Carthage, which would eventually become known as the First Punic War. It would last for 3 whole decades, finally ending into 41 BC with the Treaty of Peace of Lutatius, where Carthage would lose Sicily to Rome, but still retain control over Sardinia, Corsica, and the mainland of Spain. It would seem that despite their victories, the Carthaginians would not learn from their mistakes. Only 5 years later, they would find themselves at war with Rome once again. This time it was the Spanish mercenaries who revolted against Rome and asked for help. The Carthaginians agreed, sending in reinforcements to aid them. The Roman Senate saw this as yet another threat to their security, and responded by declaring war on Carthage. Once again, Rome and Carthage would fight a grueling war for territory, and once again, the Romans would win, pushing the Carthaginians further west. They lost mainland Spain, but kept control over the Balearic Islands and Corsica. Despite losing 2 wars against Rome, Carthage was still a great power in the Mediterranean. Their navy was bigger than Rome's, and they controlled much of the western Mediterranean. But their greatest rival would eventually get its revenge during the Third Punic War. Rome would see the destruction of Carthage as a way to cement their complete dominance over the Mediterranean. The Roman general Scipio Africanus would lead Rome to victory, destroying Carthage completely. In 146 BC, the Romans would sack the city. They would sell the survivors into slavery and kill those who resisted. They would then raze the city, killing anyone who tried to flee. This would ensure that no one would ever call themselves Carthaginian ever again. Rome's vengeance was complete. From what I can tell, the destruction of Carthage wasn't just some random event in history. It was almost inevitable from the very beginning. The war with Rome cost the Carthaginians dearly. Not only did they lose territory, but each war drained their treasury and their manpower. By the end of the Third War, their economy was wrecked. Their population had been decimated. Rome had already cut them off from much of the trade in the eastern Mediterranean, resulting in economic stagnation. When Rome destroyed the city, they cut them off from trade completely. Rome's goal was total domination of the Mediterranean, and to achieve that, they needed to destroy their greatest rival, Carthage. This is why I believe that from the moment Rome declared war on Carthage, there was nothing the Carthaginians could do to save themselves. Each decision they made led them closer to destruction. So here are 4 reasons why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Carthage. Reason no. 1. You would die in battle. As I said, the wars with Rome were costly. Even though Carthage had a big navy, the Romans soon matched and then surpassed them. By the end of the Third Punic War, the Roman navy was bigger than the Carthaginian navy and better equipped. You also need to remember that even though the Carthaginians fought well, Rome simply had more men and resources. By the end of the Third War, the Roman Republic had mobilized every asset it could to destroy Carthage. This included hiring mercenaries to fight for them. Rome hired soldiers from all across their empire, men that wanted to plunder and pillage, men that had nothing to lose. Imagine being a Carthaginian soldier facing off against these men. On top of that, you would have to fight against Roman soldiers, too. The Romans weren't afraid to sacrifice men in battle because they knew they could raise more. They were desperate to crush Carthage once and for all. So they pushed forward relentlessly, taking casualties but giving none in return. Reason number 2, you would die in a siege. The Carthaginians had many allies throughout their wars with Rome, but not one of them could help them when Rome laid siege to the city in 149 BC. The Romans built roads to the city, cut down trees to make siege towers, and used catapults to hurl boulders over the walls. Even if you managed to survive the attacks on the walls, you would still have to deal with life inside the city. Food and water supplies would quickly run out. Even if you weren't starving or thirsty, you would still have to deal with the disease and pestilence that would surely follow. People would be dying around you, falling victim to infection, starvation, and despair. If you managed to stay alive, the final assault would probably take your life. As the Roman army breached the gates, the remaining defenders fought to the death. There was nowhere to escape to. There was no surrender. It was clear that Rome wanted the city destroyed, the people enslaved, and the land turned into a Roman province. Reason no. 3. You would die if you tried to flee. Let us say that you are a Carthaginian, and you hear that the Romans are planning to lay siege to your city. Where would you go? Carthage was surrounded by powerful Roman allies. As soon as the Romans made their intentions clear, the other Italian city-states would close their borders to you. You may have been able to find refuge in Massalia, but they too would fall to Rome in 49 BC. Even if you managed to reach the coast and stowed away on a ship, you still wouldn't get far. The Roman navy patrolled the waters, searching for Carthaginian ships. If they caught you, they would either burn your ship or board it, killing everyone on it. You may have found a deserted island, but surviving there would be hard without food and water. Not to mention that the Carthaginians were excellent sailors, and the Romans would surely catch up to you. There was no escaping the Romans. They would find you wherever you hid. Reason no. 4. You would die if Rome took the city. If you thought that the Romans would spare you because you weren't a soldier, you'd be wrong. Rome's vengeance knew no bounds. The Romans sold everyone into slavery, regardless of age or social status. Women, children, and old men were put up for sale alongside strong young adults. They separated families, selling parents and children separately so they could make more money. They rounded up all the shopkeepers and merchants and forced them to walk behind the army carrying their wares. The Romans robbed them and then killed them. They did the same thing to the priests and priestesses. They killed the sacred cows and pigs and tortured the elephants until they died. The Romans didn't care what you did or who you were. As long as you were Carthaginian, you were an enemy of Rome and deserved to die. Carthage was doomed from the moment they went to war with Rome. Each choice they made led them further toward destruction. The fact that they couldn't see this coming is what makes their downfall so sad. They were blinded by pride and ambition and paid the ultimate price. Rome would eventually become a republic, then an empire, then nothing. But Carthage wouldn't live to see any of it. They would never become a republic or an empire. They would never even get the chance. They were dead before Rome even finished destroying them. And that's it. Those are 4 reasons why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Carthage. If you enjoyed this video, then check out my video on how you would die in ancient Sparta. Why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Carthage. Carthage was one of the great powers of the ancient Mediterranean. At its peak, it stretched from Iberia to North Africa and parts of the Italian peninsula. It traded with Greece, Rome, and even the Celts. But you probably wouldn't have enjoyed living there. Here's why. Fall and cultural erasure. The fall and salt of the earth. When we think of the fall of Carthage, we think of Hannibal's elephants crossing the Alps or Rome sacking the city. In reality, the fall of Carthage is much more complicated than that. If you were alive in 200 BC, the year Rome sacked and burned Carthage, you might remember seeing Hannibal return from exile to lead the city's defense. But that's about all you would have known, because most of the destruction of Carthage was done by Rome's ally, King Massinissa of Numidia, who used the war as an excuse to conquer the surrounding regions for himself. The Romans then set fire to the city, killing thousands of Carthaginians. The survivors either died of starvation or fled into the mountains. It was only after this first sack that Carthage became a Roman province. But there is a strange detail in Polybius's account of the siege. When the Carthaginians realized that the city was doomed, they salted the earth around the fields, making them temporarily infertile. This may be a myth, but given how important agriculture was to Carthage, it would make sense if they did it. Either way, Rome had gained control over the best agricultural lands in North Africa, as slaves were brought into the province from other parts of the empire to work the land. The native Carthaginian culture started to disappear. The story of the sack of Carthage has become a thing of legend. There are many accounts of the war written in both Roman and Carthaginian sources, each having their own propaganda, and this makes it hard for us to separate fact from fiction. What we do know is that the city was destroyed once and rebuilt. It was destroyed twice and finally erased from the face of the earth. This doesn't just mean that Rome defeated Carthage in battle. It means that Rome took everything from the Carthaginians. They took their land, their wealth, and even their culture. Rome wanted to make sure that the people of Carthage never rebelled again. So they did something terrible. They erased Carthage from the face of the earth. That's why you wouldn't last a day in Carthage. The Carthaginians were masters of trade, but they weren't good at waging war. They were happy to wage proxy wars through local allies, but they didn't want to get involved themselves. This left them vulnerable to the expanding power of Rome, which didn't respect their neutrality. For example, the First Punic War was caused by Carthage's refusal to intervene in a dispute between Rome and its ally, the Greek city of Messina. When Messina asked for help, Carthage felt compelled to assist, leading to conflict with Rome. During the war, Rome had taken control of the western Mediterranean, while Carthage dominated the eastern part. This meant that the two rivals rarely met on the battlefield. Instead, they fought mostly by supporting opposing sides in conflicts around the Mediterranean. The First Punic War ended with Carthage losing Sicily and Sardinia to Rome, as well as paying a large indemnity. However, Carthage was still a major power, and Rome wasn't willing to risk another costly war anytime soon. That's why they made a secret treaty with Carthage's greatest enemy, King Massinissa of Numidia. The treaty allowed them to divide the spoils if Carthage ever fell, and when Hannibal died in 183 BC, Rome declared war on Carthage. Massinissa immediately invaded the Carthaginian heartland, forcing the city to divert its army away from defending its territory to try to stop him. Meanwhile, Rome blockaded the city, cutting off its supply of food, and within 2 years, the starving citizens had surrendered. Not only blood and sand, the economy of Carthage. The economy of Carthage was based on trade and slavery. They controlled much of the Mediterranean's trade routes and had colonies all over the region. This meant that they were rich enough to hire mercenaries to do their fighting for them. But it also meant that they had to keep a close eye on their colonies. If any colony tried to break away, Carthage would use its navy to put down the rebellion, and they had a standing army of 40,000 men. This was enough to defend their territory and fight small wars. But when Rome started expanding into the Mediterranean, Carthage knew it couldn't win a direct confrontation. Carthage's economic system was built on stability and trade, but the wars with Rome disrupted trade and cost money. After losing the First Punic War, Carthage's treasury was drained. They tried to rebuild their economy by increasing taxes, but this led to unrest among the population. At the same time, Massinissa was growing stronger in the west and threatening Carthage's territory. Carthage needed to raise an army to defend itself, and so they went to war with Rome again. Would you survive slavery in Carthage? Slavery was an integral part of the Carthaginian economy. Most of the people who lived in Carthage were slaves. They worked in the fields, mines, and factories. The Carthaginians bought slaves from other Mediterranean cultures, including Greece and Rome. Slaves were considered property and could be bought, sold, and inherited. They had no rights and were subject to brutal punishments if they tried to escape or disobey their masters. Life as a slave in Carthage was hard and dangerous. They often worked long hours without pay and were frequently beaten or tortured. Many slaves died young due to overwork or starvation. If you were a slave in Carthage, you would not have been able to survive for very long because you would eventually be killed for one of 3 reasons. First, you might be killed by your master if you tried to escape. Second, you might be killed if you were caught stealing food. Third, you would eventually die from exhaustion or starvation. Could you escape to the mountains? If you were alive during the sack of Carthage, you might have thought that escaping to the mountains was a good idea. But trust me, it wasn't. The mountain tribes of North Africa were fierce warriors who raided Carthaginian and Roman settlements for fun. The tribes had no loyalty to Carthage and would have seen you as an easy target. Even if you managed to avoid being killed by the tribesmen, you would eventually die of starvation or thirst. Escaping to the mountains would not have saved you in the end. Would you side with Rome or Carthage? If you lived in Carthage, you would have had to choose a side in the war with Rome. If you chose to support Carthage, you would have been fighting against the most powerful empire in the Mediterranean. Even if Carthage won, you would still be punished by Rome. And if you sided with Rome, you would have been fighting against your fellow Carthaginians. Either way, you would have been killed. What about joining the mercenaries? Maybe you could join the Carthaginian army as a mercenary and escape being persecuted by Rome. Well, you'd be wrong. Again, the Carthaginian army was made up entirely of mercenaries. There was no loyalty to Carthage, only to money. If Carthage lost the war, the mercenaries would simply go home. This meant that there was no one to defend Carthage when Rome attacked. The end of an era. So what happened to Carthage after Rome destroyed it? The answer is not much. The land was abandoned and turned back into a desert. The ruins of Carthage were incorporated into the province of Africa. But despite this, Carthage remained a cultural center of the Mediterranean. Its language, Phoenician, remained in use for centuries, and its alphabet was used by the Greeks and Romans. The legacy of Carthage can still be seen in the ruins of its great harbor, and the remains of its temples and palaces. Do you think you could have survived in Carthage? Let me know in the comments. Welcome to my channel. From terrifying ancient Rome facts you didn't know to surprising historical parenting secrets, I bring you the craziest stories from the past. Some are scary, some are funny, but all are fascinating. Today we're answering the question, why wouldn't you last a day in ancient Carthage? Make sure to watch until the end because the last fact is the most shocking. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing videos. Fact 1. There was no escaping the heat. Imagine yourself transported back to the year 146 BC. You find yourself standing on the edge of a vast desert. The scorching Tunisian sun beating down on your neck. The air shimmers with heat haze as far as the eye can see. stretching out into a monotonous landscape that seems to go on forever. This is your new home now, or at least it will be if you somehow survive the journey back in time. Welcome to the African coast. In this harsh environment, life is a daily struggle against the elements. Every step you take is accompanied by the feeling of burning sand between your toes and the prickly heat of the sun on your skin. The relentless glare makes it difficult to look around, and each breath you take feels like inhaling hot air. The nights offer little respite either. They're filled with unsettling sounds, the nocturnal animals that stir in the darkness, their strange cries echoing across the empty dunes. It seems impossible to find a moment's peace here. The oppressive heat is constant. Whether you stay out in the open desert or venture into the shade of palm trees, it follows you everywhere. Your body sweats profusely, and you feel exhausted even after the simplest activities. But you must persevere. Staying hydrated becomes an obsession. You drink gallons of water every day, always trying to replenish what you lose through sweat. But even that doesn't seem to help much. You're trapped in a cycle of thirst and exhaustion. The boundaries between day and night become blurred. Time seems to stand still in this endless sea of sand. The sun relentlessly climbs higher and higher in the sky, making every moment feel the same. You're constantly aware of its gaze upon you, baking the earth and searing your skin. The oppressive heat becomes a part of you, a constant companion in this alien landscape. As the days go by, you start to feel like a speck of dust in this vast desert, insignificant and utterly alone. Will you be able to withstand the test of the unforgiving heat? Or will you succumb to the oppressive climate of ancient Africa? Fact 2. Slavery was commonplace. Imagine waking up in ancient Carthage, a slave owned by one of the wealthy merchants who make up the elite class. You have no rights and your life revolves around serving your master. Men, women, and children of all ages are bought and sold like commodities. The slave market is a regular sight where human lives are traded for profit. Your day begins and ends with menial tasks. You wake up before dawn and spend your hours cleaning, cooking, and doing other domestic chores. If you're a skilled worker, you might be put to work in a quarry, a factory, or on a farm. But your labor will only benefit your owner, never yourself. Any extra food you produce or money you earn goes directly to your master. Outside the house, you're constantly reminded of your subservient status. The casual cruelty of the upper classes towards slaves is astounding. Children are whipped in the streets for amusement, and many die young, either from overwork or brutal punishment. Even the slightest mistake can cost you dearly. Your master has absolute power over you, and he isn't hesitant to use it. He can sell you, abuse you, or even kill you without facing any consequences. The worst part, society condones this treatment. People don't bat an eyelid at the sight of a beaten slave. They see you as an object, nothing more than a tool for their convenience. You're denied basic human rights and treated like an animal. You dream of freedom, of a life where you can walk down the street without fear, eat your fill, and maybe one day have a family of your own. But those are just dreams. In the harsh reality of ancient Carthage, hope for a better life is a luxury you can't afford. Fact 3. Religious intolerance ran high. Imagine living in a world where your beliefs are constantly questioned and your faith is challenged. This was the everyday reality for people in ancient Carthage, a society known for its religious tolerance, but also for its fierce persecution of those who dared to stray from the accepted norms. Life here revolved around two main deities, Baal Hammon and Tanit. While the ruling class enjoyed considerable freedom of worship, the common folk were expected to adhere strictly to these state religions. The priests, deeply entrenched in society, held immense power. They could easily turn the community against you if you showed even the slightest deviation from the accepted beliefs. Foreign cults were viewed with suspicion and often targeted. For example, the Jews faced significant persecution due to their refusal to participate in local festivals and rituals. The Christians, too, suffered greatly. As they gained followers, their underground activities were seen as a threat to the social order. Early Christians in Carthage faced imprisonment, torture, and ultimately death for their beliefs. It wasn't just about faith. In ancient Carthage, respecting the gods was a matter of civic duty. If you were accused of neglecting your religious obligations or showing disrespect to the gods, you could face severe penalties, including banishment from the city. The atmosphere in Carthage was thick with tension, fear, and the constant pressure to conform. The shadow of religious intolerance loomed large, casting its darkness over every aspect of life. It was a society where your next meal and even your life depended on how well you played the game of faith. Fact 4. Death was everywhere. Imagine walking down a street lined with shops and stalls overflowing with goods. The vibrant colors of fabrics, the enticing aroma of spices, the sound of merchants hawking their wares. Amidst this bustling scene, you spot a group of men carrying a stretcher. On it lies a dead body wrapped in a shroud, being taken to its final resting place. This is your new normal in ancient Carthage. Death is not a taboo topic hidden away in hushed tones. It's a part of everyday life paraded openly in the streets. There's no such thing as peace and quiet here. The cacophony of funeral processions is inescapable. The rhythmic chanting of mourners, the clash of metal instruments, the beat of drums resonate throughout the city, announcing death's grim presence. Even the mighty and wealthy aren't exempt from this spectacle. When a prominent citizen dies, their funeral becomes a grand affair, a macabre parade of power and privilege. Their body, placed in a lavish coffin, is carried through the streets, surrounded by a multitude of mourners, each vying to show their respect or perhaps exploiting the situation for personal gain. But amidst the gloom, there's an unsettling detachment. People carry on with their daily lives amidst the funeral procession, going about their business as if death is just another part of the cityscape. For them, it's not a tragedy to be mourned, but a fact of existence to be endured. As you navigate the streets of ancient Carthage, you learn to tune out the background noise of death. It becomes the soundtrack of your life here, a constant reminder of your own mortality. Fact 5. Sanitation was non-existent. Imagine walking through the crowded streets of ancient Carthage, the stench of stale waste and decaying animals assaulting your nostrils. The air is thick with the buzz of flies, and the sight of discarded garbage strewn about is enough to turn your stomach. The concept of sanitation is completely alien to this society. There are no garbage collection systems, no clean water supply, and certainly no toilets. The streets serve as the dumping ground for everything from household waste to the bodies of dead animals. Disease spreads easily in this filth, turning every cough and fever into a potential death sentence. Houses are built haphazardly, often without proper ventilation or waste disposal systems. Sanitation is a luxury the people of Carthage can't afford. The streets are an even more unpleasant place, especially after it rains. The waste mixes with rainwater, creating a thick, murky sludge that makes walking a challenge. Stepping over piles of garbage is a necessary skill. People here wash themselves infrequently and change their clothes even less often. Personal hygiene is not a priority. The absence of running water and clean cloths means everyone walks around perpetually dirty. Bathing is a rare luxury reserved for the wealthy. Most people don't bathe for months, if not years. Food is prepared and eaten in unsanitary conditions. The lack of refrigeration means food spoils quickly. Vendors often sell spoiled or rotting food, hoping to get rid of it before anyone notices. Eating out is a risky gamble with your health. In ancient Carthage, survival depends on a delicate balance between hunger and the risk of eating contaminated food. Sanitation is not just lacking, it's completely disregarded. The people of Carthage live in a cesspool of dirt, disease, and decay. Hello, my loves. Hello. Are you ready for the final episode of Ancient Worlds? No more episodes will be made. We're done, everybody. Our journey comes to an end here. This is it. And now our journey draws to a close. The harbor has gone quiet, the sails lowered, the markets emptied. The last priest leaves the temple, and only the scent of burning cedar lingers in the air. The great Carthaginian empire, for all its reach, its silver, its salt, its ships, is gone, but not in the way stories usually tell it. You see, Carthage did not vanish. It was absorbed, layered over, built upon. Rome claimed the ashes, but the stones remained, and over time, the city was born again, not once, but many times. Punic, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, French, Tunisian. They all walked the same streets where we have walked. They breathed the same air, drank the same water, gazed at the same stars from the same hills that we have stood on today. The great Emperor Augustus visited Carthage in 29 BC. He came to survey the ruins, they say, and he brought with him the architect Vitruvius. Together, they measured the outlines of the city, calculated its dimensions, compared it to the dimensions of Rome itself, and found it wanting. So they set about rectifying that oversight by building Rome anew on the Mediterranean, and Carthage became part of that new Rome, or it tried to. As the provinces grew, the provinces changed. As cultures mingled and traded, the old city walls were torn down, new temples were built, new coins minted, new languages spoken. The foundations remained, and so the story of Carthage is not written in stone, but in layers. Every pot shard and coin tells a different tale. Every ruin remembers a different life lived here under a different sky, under a different sun. I've tried to capture just a fragment of those stories for you today, to show you the ghosts that linger here and everywhere. The ghosts of the men who hauled silver ingots out of the Spanish mines, the traders haggling over perfume and ivory tusks, generals riding back from victorious campaigns, emperors surveying their newest provinces, boys playing at the harbor edge, lovers strolling hand in hand towards the temple. These are the ones I've seen most clearly, but they are not the only ones. There are countless others whose faces we shall never know, whose voices we shall never hear, for Carthage is still there, not in marble, but in memory, in the curve of a coin, in the quiet of a ruined dock, in the slow turning of the sea, in the endless cycle of seasons. You can feel them sometimes when the wind blows across the hills, when the shadows stretch long and thin at dusk, when the waves crash against the shore and whisper secrets to the sand. Then the past returns to life. The ghosts stir in their timeless slumber. All around us are the traces of another world, a world of merchants and galleys, of generals and gods. It's almost possible to hear the clash of arms, the rumble of chariot wheels, the murmur of the crowd. So let the echoes fade now, my loves. Let the empire slip beneath the waves. Let the names rest. Let the past return to stillness. Sleep now, and may your dreams drift where the Phoenician ships once sailed, between the stars, between the winds, between the pages of forgotten empires. Good night. It is impossible to explore every corner of such a vast and layered city. There are sites scattered across the landscape, some lost, others waiting to be found, still others newly unearthed by the tireless hands of archaeologists. We can't go home again, my loves, not really. But that doesn't mean we can't pay our respects to the past. If you visit these places, bring respect and reverence to these holy spaces. Be kind and walk softly. Do not disturb the spirits that sleep beneath your feet. But if you cannot come here, then bring a bit of the ancient world home with you. Pick up a book, lose yourself in a film, light a candle and dream of far-off lands. Imagine the feel of hot sand beneath bare feet, the taste of figs and wine, the sound of drums echoing across the hills. I want each of you to take a moment to breathe it in, to let the past touch your skin, to remember that you are a part of something much vaster than yourself. You are part of a story that began long before you were born, and will continue long after you are gone. We are connected by invisible threads that stretch across time. You and I, we are bound together by the places we have explored and the stories we have shared. When the sun sets tonight, it will do so on the western shores of every land, even Carthage. And when it rises again, it will rise on a new day in every time, even Carthage. Time turns, the world changes, but some things endure. Remember the lessons we have learned here, the power of stories, the resilience of the human spirit, the beauty of a life lived to the fullest. Remember the friends we have made along the way, the companions who have shared our journey and made it all the more meaningful. As we say goodbye, I want you to know that this is not an ending, but a beginning of new adventures, new discoveries, new friendships. It's up to you now to keep exploring, to keep discovering, to keep living life to the fullest. I want you to look inside yourself and find the explorer, the adventurer, the seeker of truth that lies within you. Nurture that part of yourself. Let it grow. Let it lead you to new heights, new depths, new horizons. Don't be afraid to get lost in the world, to wander off the beaten path, to discover your own treasures. You never know what you might find. Above all, I want you to remember that you are capable of amazing things. You are strong. You are resilient. You are creative. You have the power to shape your own destiny, to make a difference in the world. Don't ever give up on your dreams. Don't ever settle for less than you deserve. Go after what you want, what you believe in, what you're passionate about. Above all, I want you to remember that life is precious. It's fragile. It's beautiful. It's a gift. Embrace it every day. Appreciate every moment. Live it to the fullest. I want you to look at the world with wonder, with curiosity, with gratitude. See the beauty in the everyday. Find the magic in the mundane. Celebrate the gift of simply being alive. This is not goodbye, my loves. It's until next time. Until next time, may your journeys be filled with adventure, with discovery, with joy. May you always find your way back home, and may you never stop exploring. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through time. It has been my privilege to be your guide and to share with you the wonders of the ancient world. Together, we have explored magnificent cities, uncovered hidden secrets, and discovered the timeless legacies of past civilizations. But our adventures don't have to end here. If you enjoyed our journey through time, I invite you to join me on another adventure. Click the link below to subscribe to my channel, where I'll continue to guide you on exciting explorations of history and culture. We'll uncover more hidden gems of our past, explore more fascinating stories, and dive deeper into the rich tapestry of human history. Together, we'll keep learning, keep growing, and keep discovering the wonders that await us. Join me on this next adventure, and let's keep exploring the world together. Goodbye.